Welcome everybody to Legal Tech Talks. My name is Frances Anderson. I'm the Managing Director of Netnor Media. So today I'm delighted to welcome an insightful panel where we're going to be discussing protecting data in the cloud, lessons learned on securing a remote and collaborative workforce, which will be moderated by the awesome Janet Day, one of the legal sector's leading independent consultants. Janet is a former global IT director, has worked in the broad sphere of legal IT virtually all her life. Even her MBA specialty was competitive advantage in the legal profession. After working in administration at A&O, Janet set up a specialist consultancy practice looking at technology services in their wider sense for law firms, and then moved in to join BLP about 20 years ago, initially as a consultant, but later as the IT director, with a wide range of responsibilities. Now, before I hand over to Janet, who will introduce the panel today and outline the agenda, I would like to go through some housekeeping with everybody. So this session will last an hour, with questions being brought in around from about 11:15, and will also be undertaking an anonymous poll in which we would love for you all to participate in. As you're aware, this session is live, and therefore, if you'd like to speak with Janet or the additional panel members directly, or ask them a question, click on your name in the panel to ask a question live. So we'll see a blue hand getting raised, and we'll bring you in nearer to the end. Or you can put a question through the Q&A at the bottom. So if you look on your home screen, you'll see the Q&A there. So you can type it in. It can be anonymous. We would love to see your name, where we'll bring up your question again to all of the panelists. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, Netskope, as well as I'm sure Toks, will be able to facilitate and assist with some of your requests afterwards. So without further ado, Janet, it's over to you.
Thank you, Frances. Good morning, everyone. I'm really lucky today to have such an esteemed panel with me, Ross, Neil and Toks, and I'm delighted that you're here. So I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, to start with just a 1-second introduction from each of you so that the audience knows who you are and why you are definitely capable of talking about protecting data in the cloud and the lessons learned from this current very strange environment in which we operate. So Toks, could I ask you to start?
Sure, no problem. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Toks. I'm one of the senior IT managers for security for Herbert Freehills. I'm primarily responsible for the UK, US and EMEA region. But globally, me and my counterpart in Asia Pac, we split up the global workload. One of my projects and initiatives is digital workplace, cloud adoption, collaboration and cloud security.
Excellent, thank you. Ross?
Yes, good morning everybody. So Ross Asquith, I am a member of the Netskope team. I actually spend a lot of time talking to organizations about their security transformation, which is their kind of adoption of cloud services and how they can be protected. So it's very much Netskope's business, helping people manage cloud. And I've been around at Netskope for over 4 years now. And before that, working for other cloud security vendors. So hopefully I can chip in today with some helpful comments.
Thank you. And Neil, finally.
So yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Neil Thacker. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for EMEA for Netskope. So I'm currently the advisory board member to the Cloud Security Alliance. I also sit on the advisory board to the Security Advisor Alliance, which is the CISO's non-profit, and also support ENISA, so the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. So my background, I've spent 20 years in information security and really been focusing on the last 10 years focused on cloud security and data protection.
Okay, thank you. So Ross, could you just set the background for the audience about what Netskope offer and why this is something incredibly relevant to your offering in the market?
Sure, yes. I guess Neil and I both touched on the fact that we work for cloud security companies, which is, let's drill down into what that means. I guess Netskope provides ultimately cybersecurity solutions that help people manage their use of cloud applications and the internet generally, although what we see today is that about 85% of internet usage is to cloud applications. That's where the data's going, that's where the action's taking place. And cloud applications can be SaaS applications, examples like Box and Office 365 and Salesforce and such. They can also be IaaS, the infrastructure as a service platforms like AWS and Azure. And they can also include the private applications that maybe an organization has developed themselves and put into those AWS type platforms or host in their own data centers. So this is all with a view to, I guess, enabling the digital transformation of businesses. So allowing them to adopt the cloud, to increase the mobility of their workforce. And Netskope wants to help organizations do that securely. So protect people from threats, ultimately protect your data as well that you're perhaps going to put into the cloud. So all of this is delivered from the cloud, rather than the traditional way of doing security, which is from a data center. Because if your users and your data isn't in that data center, then that's not where your security needs to be, right? So that's what I think we'll explore today. There's going to be a lot of talk about cloud and the right place to put your security to protect things when your users aren't within your perimeter anymore. So that's a brief introduction to Netskope. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Toks, a little bit really, I think, about the Hsf journey, and a little bit about how all of this has been forced on us during this very strange environment in which we operate.
Sure. So, our journey at HSF began quite a while ago. So we really started looking at this heavily, probably about 2 to 3 years ago. We knew that, along with our sort of corporate strategy, which was around really enhancing our service provision so that we could retain and grow business with our existing clients, as well as attracting new clients, as well as make sure we're attracting and retaining new talent. We knew that part of that journey for us was going to be maximizing on sort of cloud services and cloud platforms to make sure that our service provision was agile. We could deliver and work with our customers from anywhere, from any devices. So we had that flexibility so that we could really, deliver world-class service. So we knew we were going to do that. We also were aware as a law firm, we have a significant number of clients, which means we're custodians for a large amount of client data, which is by default confidential. And we really were aware that whatever we were going to do, that we need to make sure that that data was secure. We had visibility of that data, we had controls in place, and we had audit logs so that we knew what we were doing, we knew what was happening with the data, and we had the controls. So those were the sort of fundamental things that we took on board, and we knew that that's what we needed to achieve. And then we went out to look at what that picture actually looked like in practice. So what cloud services we were going to use, but also what security. So we had ingrained from a very early day what we needed to do with that security to make sure that we were able to use data regardless of where it was coming from or what people were using. And that's been really the sort of DNA of our security journey with regards to cloud usage. A lot of that has been around, access to data, what you're doing with the data and where the data is going. So that's what we've looked at. That's how we ended up using Netskope when we looked at what was available on the market. They came across as an incredibly strong fit for what we wanted to do, both now and also part of our futuristic our future roadmap of what we want to deliver further down the line.
Great, thank you so much, Toks. So my feeling is that the need for cloud has accelerated hugely during this crisis, and that we've probably covered 5 years learning in 5 months. But can we just talk a little bit, perhaps Toks, you could start talking about it. What are the lessons that we've learned from this incredibly accelerated use of cloud and collaboration and things like DocuSign and all of those things?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting period of time. It's definitely accelerated some things. We were in a very fortunate position at HSF. Remote working and our cloud journey had begun already. So remote working was a default. It was available to everyone already. So we didn't have issues with that. However, other areas which I know other firms have sort of had to fast track have been around collaboration tools. So in particular, the likes of Zoom, Teams, usage like that. We're very much a Skype for Business house at the time. We were in the process of deploying Teams, but it hadn't really picked up speed yet. But we definitely saw, once everyone's sort of in lockdown, those collaboration platforms and how we collaborate both internally and with our clients suddenly shot to the forefront. There were no more face-to-face meetings, whether that was in our office, their offices, or somewhere else. As teams, we had to get used to moving from being, a mix of, we were always agile working, remote working, but it was always a mix of face-to-face. So we needed to make sure that we were ready for that. So that's really pushed through some of these collaboration platforms. And with that comes, we're going to be using them to share and work on data. So it really meant where we had plans for what we wanted to do with regards to securing that had to be fast-tracked quite significantly. So you had to be very clear on what you wanted to do, but also move very fast. It's also brought some really good opportunities to change some behaviors that, potentially are a bit old-fashioned. DocuSign and Adobe Sign are particular cases in point. As a legal industry, we still have an affinity for wet signatures, both internally and with our clients. That's obviously not practical when everyone's working from home. There were numerous conversations around postal service and getting things around, but the reality is you just can't operate like that long term. So that brought about, very expedited move towards platforms like DocuSign, which was good because it's also brought about a change of behavior where certain people were very reticent to moving towards digital signatures or didn't feel that they would be accepted. We're now finding that actually it is accepted. Some clients are actually demanding it. There are a few that are still push for a wet signature, but very few. And it's also meant that our user base has gotten used to using digital signatures, whereas beforehand it would have probably been a bit more of a change process, a bit more of a hearts and minds session, whereas actually the requirements to do it have forced people's hands, and they realize actually, do you know what, this technology is quite easy to use. It's quite simple and it works. So it has been a struggle, but it has brought along quite a number of opportunities to speed up behavioral change and cultural maturing.
Yes. Is that specific to legal? Or Ross, Neil, are you seeing this from all of your clients, this rapid move and this very great focus on securing now, no longer on-premise, but in the cloud?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen an acceleration of this. As Toks mentioned, organizations may have been thinking about cloud and thinking about perhaps 2020 or 2021 will be the kind of the best time to start thinking about moving and transitioning to cloud. But what's happened, of course, this has been the crisis has been a catalyst, has accelerated organizations onboarding new applications. And you could say that for some, the cloud has been a saving grace, right? It's something that has allowed their organization to continue day-to-day operations. Of course, with that, there's challenges that have needed to be overcome. For instance, we saw a number of organizations that went from a small number of concurrent connections to certain applications to hundreds and thousands of concurrent connections pretty much overnight. And of course, even their infrastructure that they were looking to route this traffic through out to the cloud just couldn't cope. It couldn't scale based on the current requirement. Nobody had prepared really for this type of eventuality, and it came very quickly. The decision to move to 100% workforce for many organizations came within a few weeks. So of course they couldn't scale. We had stories of organizations trying to bring in appliances like VPN appliances, and they were told, well, it's unfortunate there's a big delay because everyone now wants these, and it's a 12-week delay. But working with organizations, looking at there are alternatives to that. Again, the cloud and the security cloud is an alternative. You don't have to put in appliances into your data center to give remote access to your legacy on-prem applications. And again, for a cloud, it makes really no sense to be routing your traffic back through to your data center. Right? We always talk about that from an organization's perspective. Why would you redirect traffic to your data center, adding hops, adding latency, and ultimately that becoming a bottleneck when you can actually think about applying security controls inline in its path direct to cloud. So that's where we're seeing organizations really focus on thinking about a network and security transformation. And even looking at, again, just thinking about the old ways of doing things. So Toks mentioned wet signatures. Why we're using IP-based authentication to connect back to networks. Why not focus on the application and grant access to applications? I think ultimately what we've also seen is a number of collaboration tools being used. it's not just one or two. As more and more organizations work with, again, their third parties, and again, other, again, legal firms, for instance, you're now using, again, the preferred tool of choice. And now you're looking at, again, different type of instances of services as well. So teams and things like that, where there's actually multiple instances and you have to secure those as well. You have to think about threat protection and data protection per instance.
Yeah, Toks, do you want to come back on this threat protection point? Because obviously HSF were beautifully ahead of the curve, delightfully positioned and ready to be cloud enabled. Do you want to make a comment on this?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, I mean, the threat protection, is critical. As I said, for us, the primary focus on the cloud adoption is around the data. Obviously, we've got other security concerns, infrastructure, and all the rest of that. But from a cloud use perspective, it's very much around the data. So for us, it was very critical to make sure that, regardless, as Neil said, we are Skype House. We were pushing Teams, but we have clients who use Zoom, some use WebEx, and the plethora of other platforms that they use internally. And again, because everybody's working from home, it means the demands to use these multiple platforms is there. So we have to make sure that we were in a position to make sure we had the tools whereby we could have that level of baseline threat protection regardless of whatever platform was being used. So a lot of our sort of cloud security and what we've done with Netskope has not only been around securing the data with our own internal apps, our commissioned applications, whether it's Office 365. So we've got live visibility on data as it's going through the platform. We also have data at rest visibility and controls. So we're getting alerts, rules are being applied to that data, both in line and at rest. But we also have looked at, and we use the Netskope platform to extend that security umbrella to web traffic or cloud, generalistic cloud traffic. So even if someone is using another platform that isn't one of our internal platforms, we still have that visibility of what's happening, and that's been really crucial for us to make sure that we can see what services people are using, the security and privacy of those systems. So we use the Netskope platform, which does assessments, which are continuously updated on various cloud services. So it gives us the opportunity to make risk-based decisions on what we're doing. So someone might want to use platform X, which is high risk, but they want to use it. That means we can say, okay, we can use that platform, but here are the controls around using that. So it's been really, really, really important to have that visibility of all of that cloud activity.
And finally on this topic, Ross or Neil, whichever one you wishes to come in, how much do you think that the maturity of an organisation like HSF in terms of having already explored cloud has made this whole secure operational environment more straightforward? And what have you been able to do to help people who perhaps weren't quite as far down the line?
Yeah, I think there was definitely an advantage to an organisation that had thought about cloud and was already adopting it, like Toks says, and HSF had done. I think for a lot of people, when suddenly they had all their folks working from home, their primary thoughts were, how do we connect them back to the office? They thought it was a remote access problem, right? And that's where those organizations struggled, because suddenly they had a system provisioned to deal with 30% of their organization being at home, now having to handle 70, 80% of their organization being at home. Those that had already sort of identified that many of the apps that were inside could be hosted in the cloud and had moved to that, and were obviously at an advantage, it goes without saying. But it did become apparent that users working remotely, working from home in the most part, it wasn't just about the way that they accessed apps or remote access. It was all the other places they went as well that they could suddenly access perhaps without going through the corporate systems. So I think people's kind of concerns changed. Initially it was all about remote access. Then it was all about what are these users doing when they're at home. We've lost some visibility, lost some control of them perhaps. And so, yeah, Toks and Neil both made pretty valid points on the initial question. So I'll stop there and I'll see if Neil wants to say anything more, but I think we've got it covered.
Neil, do you want to come in?
So again, I think from that perspective, we saw three things being looked at by organizations. One was the application risk, which Toks mentioned. Again, Is there any additional risk associated to the use of that application? Again, as more and more applications are being brought on board. So is there a risk associated to the application? What is the employee context? Again, has the behavior of a employee changed from working from home and perhaps having access to more tools and technologies, etc. And then ultimately, again, around data protection. So the third point was around data protection. So again, how has the handling of data changed? And again, do we need to think about additional controls for that? So those organizations that had thought about those things before going into lockdown and having to work from home, I think for their transition was relatively easy. But for some, they realized that this was a new set of risks that they need to really start assessing and start making things more risk-based, more data-centric, and start thinking about how they better protect the employee.
So can we move on to this risk point? Because it would seem to me that the current crisis has increased that risk, and particularly because maybe many of your users, and I'm going to start with you, Toks, if I may, many of your users may be working on their own devices in an environment where you can't necessarily guarantee how they're using those devices or what the security model around that is, and put that in parallel with the fact that sadly, of course, the criminal workforce has responded brilliantly to this changed environment and has been up there ready to do everything they possibly can to attack the fact that people are no longer working in the office, but they are working at home in different locations from different devices. So how have you gone about approaching that?
Yeah, so it has changed. So whether we are definitely seeing more logins from non-corporate devices. What we're also seeing is those corporate devices are also being used for a lot more mix of corporate and personal activity. As part of our approach to agile and modern working, we do allow certain personal activity to be done on our corporate machines. So that has increased. I think also, everyone sort of went into lockdown thinking, they'd have time for new hobbies and new things. And I think the reality is we're all working longer days than we were beforehand. So the activity and the usage of those machines has increased. With regards to sort of personal devices, again, this was something that we sort of factored for when we were sort of looking at our long-term strategy and roadmap of how we wanted to secure these. And that was one of the requirements when we went to Netskope and we're looking at the provisioning, was to be able to have that protection, particularly around our own corporate applications and cloud services, have that coverage no matter what device you were using. So this is where some of that integration is quite key. So we know we have integration. I use Office 365 as its one of the core examples. We have that integrated with Netskope. So the controls and visibility that we want to have around our Office 365 usage, that is extended no matter whether you're coming from a corporate device or personal device. So that's been very crucial to us in terms of how we push it out. But you're right, the risks are increasing. Some of the, I have kids, there are lots of people with kids, that sometimes devices are shared, unfortunately. So we have to make allowances for that and make sure that we have our corporate data and corporate applications within their own secure bubble, so that it reduces that risk of data exfiltration or loss, whether it's accidental or malicious. We are seeing, as with everyone else, significant rise in not only phishing and email-based scams, but phishing as well. So telephone-based scams have increased significantly, and we're constantly having to make sure that we're pushing our awareness and our comms message out to our users. We are looking at how we can extend, Netskope has a capability, but we haven't deployed it. So we are looking at how we can extend or speed up our plan to extend that coverage to mobile devices. So we can actually cover activity from corporate devices and again, have that monitoring and those controls on directly on things like mobiles, which will help bolster the protection we already get from that access from anywhere device protection that we have on things like Office 365. So you have to constantly, as with everything in security, constantly be aware of what's happening, constantly adapt, and be in a position to quickly change, which is where the power of a platform like Netskope and the power means you can put in those policies and those rules and also get that visibility to actually see what's going on and adapt quickly.
Okay, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you, Toks. Neil, Ross, do you want to come in and just try and broaden this idea of thinking about the risks and how you can help, how your platform and your experience helps you with clients who are perhaps a little less mature than the HSF model?
Yeah, so I mean, there are lots of starting points to this. I mean, some organizations are already maturing their cloud security program. For me, it's having visibility into which services you're looking to protect. I mean, if we think about an organization today, if they ask the question to that organization, how many cloud services are you using and what data is being stored in those cloud services, it's highly unlikely that somebody will be able to give me a very accurate answer. So for me, from always looking at risk, you have to think about, again, a potential likelihood. So how many applications are we using? How are they configured? Are they securely configured? How am I maintaining authentication to those services? And how do I basically secure those services? Because we've also seen a rise in the number of attacks that use cloud services to deliver payloads. So for instance, instances of file sharing applications, cloud-based file sharing that everyone pretty much uses today to send data to and from other organizations. And we're seeing a big rise in the use of inserting malware and people accessing, downloading files, and that's how malware is propagating. We're seeing even the use of SaaS services to issue command and control commands to compromised devices. So the thing is with cloud, it's having that visibility, understanding for which application, what it's being used for, by whom, for what purpose, what data is going to those applications. And again, if you think about this this is actually also a mandated requirement that you have a register, a record of all of your data processing that occurs inside your organization and understand who is processing that data. Even if a cloud service provider is storing data, they are probably considered a data processor. So you would need to have a record of that activity. So visibility is key. And then thinking about layers of threat protection and data protection are key. So again, if a threat originates from the cloud, you can apply a layer of threat protection there. I mean, phishing attacks, we've seen a rise in phishing attacks where about 36% of phishing attacks will use a URL, a link back to a cloud service. So thinking about how you're protecting kind of that ingress point to your organization. But also from a data protection perspective, we can't forget that obviously a lot of security incidents are caused by human error. So thinking about how you're applying layers of data protection. A very common example could be somebody that's sharing a file through OneDrive or G Drive or again, one of these file collaboration tools, but they're uploading it to their own personal instance. It's very hard to actually identify which instance you're uploading to without you double checking. If you're using both your personal and corporate instance, you need to go through and just double check. And we've seen lots of examples where people are sharing this data through their personal instances. Really, we should be thinking about blocking those types of activities and just educating the employee, a little pop-up box that appears telling them that they're uploading corporate data to a personal instance of OneDrive. Click here and we'll direct you to the corporate instance of OneDrive. That is a great way to promote security awareness and education real time to the employee.
Thank you very much, Neil. That was very helpful. And you've segued beautifully into our online poll. So for those of you who are on this meeting, there's an online poll will be posted momentarily and it will be on the screen for a minute or two. It's entirely anonymous. And it is looking at what are the essential controls for allowing collaboration tools. So considering all the points that we've just been raising about the way we are working in this new environment and the way we are forced electronically to collaborate, how do we as technical professionals, either providers or users or consumers, try to manage the possibility of the payload going wrong? So that poll will remain up on the screens for another minute, I should think. And then very shortly after that, we will get the answers to that poll. Now, in the interim, Ross or Neil, I don't know if you want to just touch on the way that you've had to support people approaching the use of collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know, and we said at the beginning, collaboration tools, the use of them is accelerate. You could look at the licenses that teams have sold. Microsoft have published those figures, I think, on their recent earnings call. You can look at the share price of Zoom. Everything goes upwards, right? So without a doubt, collaboration tools have increased. So, and it boils down to some of the issues I think we've already discussed. What is it that's wrong with these collaboration tools when it comes to securing our data? Well, it just makes it easy for data to move from perhaps a device that we manage to some area that we don't. And it makes it very easy for a user to take that data that perhaps belongs to us, maybe is sensitive, and share it with others. And perhaps that's done necessarily because you're sharing internally within the organization. But collaboration tools make it a little bit perhaps too easy to share things externally, which again, sometimes is necessary, but many times may not be. And we've seen plenty of instances of not just collaboration tools, in fact, but things like cloud storage tools, where people have inadvertently shared, hundreds of HR records publicly with the internet, and they don't know that it's happened because it isn't always obvious to the end user, or it's too, these tools are made to appear and be simple to use from the user. So, do you want to share this with this person? Yes, I do. No, I don't. Right? It's really super straightforward, and that forces the user perhaps to make mistakes. It's not always a malicious motivation that means that a data leaks out of your organization through these tools. It can be just mistakes.
Yeah, I'd probably add to that. I mean, we don't for of the 1,000 cloud services that we use today, as again, a typical organization, nobody has training for each one of those applications. I mean, in an ideal world, we do that, but it's not possible. So again, what we typically see is that organizations will give somebody access to a new tool, a platform to use, give some basic again, training around it, how to use it. But again, that doesn't scale across all those applications. So what you're now seeing is not ultimately the employees' issue when they're trying to configure these things themselves to securely share a file, for instance, as that example. Really what we should be thinking about is putting up some guardrails, so that if somebody is using a tool and we can just secure them at the same time. We also need to consider the risks to the organization, the risks to the employee, and we also need to make sure that we just maintain a good record of what's going on inside our organization.
Right. Well, I'm delighted to tell you all that the poll results are up, and there's an overwhelming vote for everything needs to be considered when looking at these poll results. But Neil, because I know this is your area of specialization, do the results come as a surprise?
They do. I mean, interesting that nobody chose threat protection as part of this from a collaboration tool perspective. Yeah. As an interesting one. Yeah. Obviously, we assumed that I think all of the above is the best answer. I think for me, thinking about this, if I look at answers A, B, C, and D, they're all things that we can do. We can predefine. So security controls, so managing access control, authentication, those are things we typically try to do up front, right? We do these things in advance of deploying any new collaboration tool, so that we can manage those things. Threat protection and data protection are also fundamentals. So we should be doing those again, predefining things such as performing malware analysis and writing new DLP rules that can focus on protecting the data going to these applications. Secure configuration is an interesting one. Thankfully, somebody did say that they see this as being essential, because again, this goes down into this whole shared responsibility model of cloud, is that for most cloud services, the secure configuration is ultimately up to the customer. So thinking about this, how you give access control, how you apply data protection, how you apply levels of secure configuration, they're all things that are the customer's responsibility. For option E is an interesting one as well. This is post-type event activity. So a lot of collaboration tools will have this built into their product. You can go in, you can pull logs and alerts back into a centralized kind of SIM, security information event management tool that you can go through and start looking at events. But of course, we know that could be a little bit too late. And I think organizations they have a lot of alert and event fatigue. So I think for me, again, the right answer is F. That would be my answer if I was to answer this poll. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do so. But it is a compromise of both protective type controls from A to D, as well as kind of detective response. But if you think about this, most organizations really be wanting to focus on those preventative controls first, and then everything else picked up as part of detective. capability.
Yeah, I absolutely see that. Toks, do you want to just come in on these poll results?
Yeah, I mean, it is without a doubt, it is all of the above. I mean, our journey began with visibility was a big thing for us. We, like a number of firms, we came from a position of using, fairly legacy proxy servers or secure web gateways that were on-prem. They were very good at, URL filtering and looking at web activity and blocking things like that. But the visibility of what activity was going on and the visibility in some of the more modern cloud platforms just wasn't there. You just knew someone had used the service and that was it. So gaining visibility was one of our key focuses at the beginning with Netskope, and that then gave us a true picture of what our users were using, what they found useful to get on with their work, what the inherent risks were with those various platforms. That then fed into our risk management process. So what controls, what rules did we want to have and policies did we want to develop from our sort of core baseline? You're allowed this, you're not allowed that. What did we want to develop so that we were allowing our users to work in a productive manner, but work in a secure manner, and making sure that that underlying data was definitely protected. So the visibility is really important. Using that to drive and continuously drive and improve your risk management through policies is then what you use that visibility and that intelligence for. The logging and auditing obviously means that you can, whether it's an audit or internal review, again, you're seeing what's going on and you can manage and deal with threats and risks as they pop up. For us, threat protection is quite important. Cloud services are consumer, whether they're enterprise or personal, they're designed as a consumer platform. So they're really easy to use and they're very easy to share data and also receive data. So we have antivirus and the like all over the place. For us, it's part of that sort of defense in depth of making sure that we've also got something in line with that data, whether it's coming in via a Teams call or someone's sharing something from Google Docs or OneDrive. With having that additional layer of protection at the cloud level is quite important, because it's just another layer and it protects it before it even hits our infrastructure. We're all aware that we do the training, we push the message out, but we all have users that will still click on things and open up stuff. So having that extra level of the threat protection is quite important. A lot of what I've spoken about has been focused on SaaS, so services. But like a lot of firms, we are looking to use cloud to, not cut costs, but cut administrative overhead by moving some of our infrastructure away from on-premise servers to the cloud. So not only is secure configuration really important for SaaS services, Teams is a great example. Do we want to allow external guests into our actual Teams, not the conversation or not the conversational part of it, but our actual Teams platform? As a baseline rule, we don't, but it's making sure you've got that core configuration and visibility of any changes to that in your SaaS service. But also we're looking at infrastructure as a service, which then makes that secure configuration incredibly critical. We've all seen the S3 stories, the numerous buckets that are leaking here, there and everywhere. It's really crucial to have that secure configuration visibility as well. So yeah, for us, all of the above is important.
So thank you for that. And actually, that's really quite a helpful segue into our final planned question, where I would just like us to think, you've talked very helpfully there, Toks, about things that you found as quick wins and advantages, but it might help the audience to think about what are the pitfalls as you move security to the cloud? What do they need to be aware of in advance to give them a head start?
Sure. So the reality is it's different. So legacy infrastructure and security in the cloud do not mix very well, particularly legacy and complex infrastructure. So we've got 27 offices globally. We have quite a complex network, quite complex infrastructure, lots of services. We've been traditionally on-prem. We manage that all in-house. Obviously, as that's operational, we have to fix things. So we put in patches and updates here, there, and everywhere. So it's very good as an on-prem infrastructure. However, that is not a lift and shift to secure data and cloud security. It is, you have to make sure that you have the right infrastructure to interface properly, particularly on the network side and firewall side. So you want to make sure that they are talking together. Also with remote working as well and the endpoints, there's numerous ways that you can secure that cloud activity. However, the most robust method to do that is via endpoint client, so that you've got that rich visibility. So that does mean you have to deploy, you do have to deploy some software. So it's again being sure that you're in a position to deploy that globally and manage that globally as well. So there are areas where you do sometimes have to invest in upgrading your infrastructure to make sure you're up to date, so that you can interface.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Can I remind the audience that there is an opportunity for you to ask questions online, and we will be coming to that very soon. In the interim, Neil or Russ, I don't know whether you want to comment on the quick wins and the pitfalls, and anything you've observed looking at it as a registered recommended supplier in this area.
So I'll perhaps pick up on what Toks was saying about that, integrating with on-premise. When kind of perhaps a few years ago, when Netskope was kind of talking to organizations about their adoption of cloud and moving perhaps some of their security controls into the cloud, we had lots of conversations about how Netskope's cloud-based security tools could integrate with the on-premise tools. Maybe the organization had a DLP solution on premises, or they wanted to continue to use their firewall to filter internet traffic, and over the years that seems to have dropped away, and now actually the need to leverage that DLP solution that the customer had maybe on premises has gone, and instead we'll do that DLP in the cloud natively, right? Because it just makes sense to move everything there once you start. And especially what we've seen recently with this increase in users moving away from the data center, it just accelerates that further, right? A similar thing would have been in the past, we'd observe the cloud applications that an organization was using, and we'd kind of report that to the organization, and then the organization will say, right, I'll take that, and then I'll use my firewall to just block all those apps that I don't like the look of. And it was a very kind of basic way of trying to control how cloud was used, but it was too black and white, right? To use your firewall to block access to, slack.com or dropbox.com is too black and white, because you're going to need to use those tools to collaborate, as was said earlier. Just because you didn't select Dropbox as your collaboration tool doesn't mean that someone you work with hasn't selected that tool, and they're going to be expecting you to access that in order to work with them. So that would maybe, sort of a pitfall in terms of integrated with on-premises tools, but really it's gone away over time as people realize they can do more and more in the cloud.
And another pitfall is actually that transition. So it's something actually that was noted on the EMEA threat landscape report, highlighted that organizations that are transitioning from kind of legacy to cloud-based technologies, they're now having to manage multiple controls and capabilities. And during that transition period, there is a potential high likelihood of them being compromised, because they can miss an event, they can miss an incident, because they're now having to juggle these two things. So what we're seeing is organizations obviously that have made that decision. Again, the majority of my data is moving to the cloud, therefore my control should be in the cloud. The transition period should be relatively fast. And also there's then that opportunity to then replace and think about, well, I still need a legacy control, like a VPN. Appliance. I still have on-prem applications that I need to connect back to. But again, can I now manage this through, again, a cloud service? Does it have to be an appliance or VPN appliance that sits on my network, even a virtual appliance that sits on my network? And thinking about things such as zero trust network access. It's a super buzzword right now, zero trust network access. But thinking about this, well, again, if I'm still thinking about how I connect my employees back to my organization and to the cloud, should I make it just transparent for them? Should I just say, well, it's all now part of one control set, and I can apply the same policies and the same security configuration to, again, to that traffic, regardless if it's on-prem applications or cloud? It should really be, that's ultimately what we're looking at. As also a win. So turning that pitfall into a win is making this whole thing transparent to the employee. Other wins, of course, I think Toks mentioned this at the beginning, the whole operational effectiveness I know running security operations teams that I would have 25%, 30% of my team's time just patching and updating appliances, thinking about appliance renewals every 3 to 5 years, having to swap those out, re-rack them, put them into the data center, think about, again, the delivery of those services, onboarding. It took a lot of time to do that. And no organization has infinite resources in terms of their security team. So obviously with cloud, you're utilizing microservices that are patched and updated automatically. And those are kind of things that when you think about from a cost saving, from a labor saving perspective, they're huge in terms of those wins. So ultimately cost saving, cost reduction, operational effectiveness, those are all wins. But we also need to think about those original pitfalls and how we transition out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I just add just a bit on what Neil said? So particularly around that transition piece. So that's another area as well. It's a pitfall, but it's an opportunity, and it's around mindset. So it's around knowing what you're doing. Traditionally, you'll have someone in applications who deals with antivirus. Networks team might deal with the URL filtering. When you shift to cloud security, that's normally all within one package. So you have to know which team is going to be actually responsible for the operation of this as well, which was an area when we first moved. It was mapping out, actually, do you know what, we don't have a team that can take this on with our current organizational structure of IT. So it's really understanding what you're doing and how you're going to do it and making sure that you're aligned to support that.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a few questions coming in now. One is specifically addressed to you, Toks, so let's approach that one and then we'll roll back to the next one, which is a much wider one. You're thanked for your insight, and I thank you for your insight, but it says, do you value the cyber partners working together to assist with the cyber fabric as opposed to a point patch solution? The questioner says they can see value you are realizing through working with Netskope to access cache and web controls, but are there other cyber partners that complement this environment?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, you have your risks, you have what it is you want to protect and how you want to protect it, and then you look to, that's our approach. And then we look to what capability we already have or what capability do we need to bring in. Yeah. And that's really what drives us. In the old days, it used to be best of breed. Us as a strategic direction, we are looking at what meets our requirements, but also allows us to consolidate our tools down, because in security, we've historically had too many tools, too many portals that don't really talk together, and it's just a lot of work. So we look to what's going to cover us. So Netskope for us, we're using it as a CASB. We are using it as a secure web gateway, when I can say the words. And we are also looking at future terms, whether that's going to be a right fit for us to replace our VPN and our application proxies. Now that covers us for a large part of our use requirements, but we also have other requirements that it doesn't meet. So we do also have a secure web gateway, which I think was one of the examples brought up in the question. We do also have some complementary tools. So we do have complementary tools. There will always be some overlap because that's just the nature of what it is. But what we go for is driven by our requirements and what we want to protect and what we want to enable and empower as well. So we try and consolidate, but we do mix it up as well when we have to. Okay,
that's really helpful. Thank you. And I'm going to ask a much broader question now because I want Neil and Ross to come in on this one. So this is talking about the common use of SaaS, but in law firms, CAS, Communication as a Service, is often of great relevance. So regarding the ever more important connectivity of professionally used devices, do you see an urgency to address data security in connected devices, especially in the work environment of a legal employer? So perhaps if I could ask either Ross or Neil to come in on that one.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at initially talking about those kind of unified communications as a service. I think, you do have to look at the traffic types you're dealing with there. When you're dealing with voice and video like we're using today, it's difficult to add a lot of value over the top of that with a security tool because there isn't data being transferred in a format that is readily inspected, right? If I give you a list of credit card numbers now while we're on the call, there aren't many security tools barring some voice recognition system that I think is probably more advanced than any of us have seen, that could identify that. But many of those platforms do have kind of instant messaging capabilities built in as well. They would allow the transfer of files, of data in a more traditional sense, I guess, and that's where probably there is an opportunity to use the sorts of tools that we're familiar with, the data leakage prevention tools, to look at identify the activity that's being taken by the user. Are they communicating verbally, or are they uploading something or sharing something? As soon as we can identify an activity that might pose a risk to our data, then we stand a better chance of being able to manage it, I guess. There's obviously a blurring of those kinds of unified communication tools and the sorts of platforms that, say, we're using now, like Zoom or Teams, because they are providing some of those capabilities, albeit typically in front of a computer rather than maybe a mobile device or just a handset in the case of something like VoIP. So I think there's a blurring line there, perhaps, between unified communications and the types of tools we're using here. I don't know, Neil, whether you've got anything you'd like to add on that.
No, nothing to add. Again, as you mentioned, I mean, as an example, we use Zoom as our primary video conferencing tool. But I've got, I think Toks mentioned this as well, the same thing. I've got about 4 or 5 other tools that I've also got installed. Teams, I've got about 4 or 5 different instances where we're working with our third parties and customers and other vendors, where there's data going constantly backwards and forwards across Teams. Is actually the video capability and the communications capability of that tool is actually the one that's least used in terms of its collaboration. But for me, it's and the question is really valid. Is again, I mean, can I send certain data to one of those Teams instances? Again, how do I make sure that I am sending it to the right instance? People work fast. People work. Obviously being remote and those kind of things, it just feels like we're constantly working 12, 14, 16-hour days. But in some cases, we need to think about those controls. We need to think about the collaboration capabilities of other tools. It's really hard to put a category on a collaboration tool today, other than just calling it a collaboration tool. There's multiple streams, multiple connectivity options. We even have to think about, well, how do we decode some of that traffic? It's not just traditional HTTPS, SSL, TLS traffic. It can also be API, JSON. So we need to think about how we decode that as well. That's something that we've focused on at Netskope, having that capability to inspect that layer of traffic as well. So that kind of the layer 8 that we talk about it beyond the application, where we're thinking about the API JSON decoding as well.
Okay, Toks, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, the comment is very true. Communication as a service is definitely been one of the hot topics for us in legal, particularly since, even beforehand, but definitely since lockdown, that has forced our hands to really adapt to pick up the pace of that. It's an area that we focused on. So we are using some of the capability in Netskope to get a bit more visibility and a bit more monitoring of some of the activity that's happening. We're also using Netskope to apply some controls. Primarily, these controls are at rest or after the event, but it still means that we've got the visibility and can take action. And we're looking at how we can enhance that to more some sort of more inline live monitoring controls as we go along. So it is incredibly important. You do need to sort of try and get the visibility into these platforms, because they're not just comms platforms, they are data transfer platforms. And that's an area that we would always want and need visibility. The instance awareness is also a great feature. So we use Office 365, but our deployment is aware of HSF's OneDrive deployment as opposed to someone else's. So it gives us the ability to create rules that are based on, our own OneDrive instance. Go ahead, get on with what you need to do. If it's not a HSF OneDrive instance, then we've got various controls over who can actually even do that, and then what they can do. And that expands to, a number of core and key cloud platforms, whether it's the Microsoft estate or Google or any of the others. So that instance awareness is really critical, because that's, where corporate services and personal services are merging in terms of the provision. You do want to make sure that people aren't accidentally or maliciously moving data into the wrong instance.
Yeah. Okay. Now, there's while we're on this topic of communications, I think one of the things that's really fascinating, and one of the audience has suggested is, are there any performance issues when you're using tools for increased visibility, specifically for audio or video applications? I don't know whether Neil or Ross would like to come in on that.
Yeah, so I would just say that, when we're looking at video, audio traffic, again, as I said earlier, it's not typically something that actually many security tools would inspect. But what you can do is obviously look at the way that your network's architected. A lot of people have found if they are having an architecture that means that they're backhauling traffic from their remote workers through their data center and out to the internet, that increased latency from that extra journey that the traffic has to take, can compromise things like video conferencing together with other tools. So being able to split away some of the traffic maybe to go directly to the internet through a cloud service like Netskope's, that then frees up bandwidth in the data center, maybe to handle, the traffic that we can't inspect. I mean, it's about balancing and prioritizing traffic, I guess, to make sure that things work. Because you always want a positive user experience, right? You never want to impact that with your security tools. We all know that. And so actually by taking some of the traffic away from the data center, running it through the cloud that's scalable, that's going to be able to provide the performance that you need to layer on security without affecting user performance, is a good thing, and can free up bandwidth then for things like video that you can't really handle through a security tool.
And I'd probably add to that. So for instance, we had an example with an organization that was VPN everything. And obviously during the crisis, they realized that was an issue. And immediately the thought was, well, their VPN appliances are not going to be able to cope with that level of traffic. But actually it was also their MPLS line, so their actual link to back out to the internet was the first thing to basically break, because it can handle all of that video conferencing traffic and route it out. So to Ross's point, again, it's being smart how you route that traffic, and also think about the control. So we've seen lots of things such as, and even with Microsoft 365 rollouts, where organizations have been told to just grant an exception, put an allow list of all of Microsoft 365's URLs into their existing secure web gateway, which basically means that you're going direct out to the internet. So you can't put any control to those things. And that's not thinking about threat protection and data protection from that service as one example. We do need to sit in line. We do need to put controls around that. Putting an exception or bypass list because of performance is not really an issue. Something we've been very dedicated at Netskope is to deal with that challenge by building again our global network, our carrier grade kind of type network, in terms of being able to handle that capacity and being able to scale at speed to deal with that type of traffic, by also applying those security controls. And that's where we see a lot of organizations really realizing the value that we can, in some cases, even increase and improve performance while also applying levels of security controls associated to the requirements of that organization.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to have one final question as we finish off, which has come from outside legal, which I always think is really interesting, just because we get focused sometimes in legal thinking we're the only people with problems. And this comes from the higher education sector. In fact, it comes from Saudi Arabia. And if I summarize the questions, it says, are cloud security awareness necessary for enhanced organization development? How can we protect data privacy whilst doing digital transformation in higher education, but actually, I think, generically? And how does SaaS help in digital transformation? Would anyone, I think this is a 1-minute soundbite from everyone, really. Toks, would you like to take it first?
Yeah, I'll go for it. So bizarrely enough, I used to work in education before I moved to Hsf, and I did the whole GDPR transformation program. So for me, cloud security awareness and what it brings you is actually critical for data privacy, because fundamentally, you can't protect what you don't know about. So you need the visibility of any PII or personal data, regardless of where it's going, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. So I think using tools like this to get that visibility is important from an activity monitoring perspective. that's something where you've got to sort of make sure you're liaising with HR, but you're also making users aware what you're monitoring and why. But it is, again, critical that you are monitoring.
Yeah, and I'd add, I think about data privacy and compliance generally. I mean, in higher education, you have a very special category of data you need to protect, personal data, right? So, and think about this again, thinking of if you're an organization that uses 1,000 cloud services, where is that data being stored? What provisions and security controls and agreements do you have in place to protect that data? Those are all the things you need to think about as you think about security, privacy, compliance, and cloud.
Okay, I'm going to creep one last question in because it's flipped in and it's so relevant. I think we'll just cover it off. And it says, during the COVID-19 lockdown period, what are the quick wins to be implemented with Netskope from a CASB and an SWG perspective? What would add the most value to an organisation?
Well, I think that traditionally we've always perhaps targeted remote workers as a quick win within an organisation for looking at new technologies, right? They were typically, the people that work remotely were the ones that perhaps got a little bit forgotten about. And that was always a quick win for us as an organisation, for Netskope to go in and talk to someone about, well, let's see if we can add the layers of protection to that user base that typically your users in the office enjoy. But I guess that's blurred a little bit now that so much of the organisation perhaps is remote. But I think, trying to fill any gaps, anywhere where there's a bypass, anywhere where the organisation has put in a whitelist for certain users or to a particular application, we like to talk to people about whether that whitelist, that exception, that kind of blanket policy is actually appropriate. As Toks said, do you allow access to Office 365 or do you allow access to just your account within Office 365? And that's an important level of differentiation.
So Toks, Neil, do you want to just quickly come in on that?
I was just going to say freedom and flexibility with security controls. I mean, those are the things that we're seeing quick wins, right? We need to make sure that our organizations continue to operate with this crisis. And for me, it's giving back. I mean, security, I know 20 years ago when I started, we could say no to things. We could say, like, you can't go ahead and do that. The risk to the organization is too great. We can no longer say that. So we have to offer freedom and flexibility, but we have to compromise with appropriate security controls, those threat protection, those data protection security controls apply to CASB, Secure Web Gateway. That's where you get those quick wins.
Yeah, I'd say quick wins. I mean, for us, we see CASB and Secure Web Gateway as pretty much one. We treat them as one now just because of the way it works. Quick wins, if you haven't already implemented platforms such as Netskope, it's just getting it deployed for the visibility. Forget about deploying controls or anything first. You can get it deployed. That visibility is key. You'll actually see what people are doing. As I said, you can then use that to make risk-based decisions on what you actually need to control, so that you are being flexible, but you're also being secure.
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Ross and Neil from Netskope and Toks from Hsf. I'd also like to point out that I'm sure Ross and Neil would be very happy to respond to any questions that anyone in the audience has to come in on. So I'm offering this up without having checked with them, but there you go. Feel free to contact them because I'm sure they'll be delighted. May I say my personal thanks to Toks for taking the time to open up about what you're doing at Hsf and let the audience share in your successes and the problems that you faced on the way. And Neil and Ross for letting us know what offerings there are in the market that help us through this very complex environment. And I'd like to hand over to Francis just to close this down and to say goodbye to you all.
So thank you all of you, Toks, Neil, Ross, Janet, Netskope as a whole, for really sort of outlining some of these safeguards, what needs to be done, but more importantly, the customer story also, what you're doing at the moment, Toks. It's, I think it's highly relevant and it's always nice to be able to share knowledge within the community. As Janet knows, it's quite difficult sometimes getting people to engage like that. So thank you. It's been really, really enlightening. And what I want to say to everybody is that we'll be sending out a feedback form. So please do let us know your thoughts, and it'd be great to engage with you in that way. And again, thank you for joining us today. And we have the next one on the 21st of July where it's all about future generations. So our next set of people like yourself, Toks, coming into the community. So thank you, everybody. And join us again for the next one. And thanks again, Janet. You've been amazing. Thank you. Bye.